All right, so welcome to The Jig is Up. Today I'm joined by Patrick Harriott, who is running for election in Victoria. So welcome, Patrick. Welcome to Jig is Up.
Thanks for having me, Darcy. Yeah.
Right on. So you're running for election, and just kind of wanted to, give you the opportunity to let people know why you're running and what your goals are for running.
Well, I mean, really, it's always been about Métis people. It's been about grassroots voice and seeing the things that matter to Métis people be advocated for on the provincial level. When I was first really getting into donating my time to the community, I was looking around and I said, well, why don't we have more cultural events? And I was told, well, there's no money for cultural events. And after 5 years of working towards it, there was in fact money for rendezvous that we haven't had on the island for the last 10 years. And so we put on 2 back-to-back rendezvous with all the great volunteers in my community. And then I said, well, what about Michif? We need to know our language. And found out that there was really nothing going on, especially in British Columbia for Michif. So, with the help of a bunch of my community volunteers, we found some money for Michif and started some lessons. And then I found out that, well, there really isn't any material for lessons. So I started reaching out to different Michif teachers and got Norman Fleury that came out to our community and really inspired the community to learn Michif, and then reached out to Heather Soder, who teaches at the University of Manitoba, and with some additional funding that we found, now we have Michif lessons for 40 community members until 2022. So these things are possible. It's just about having the will to look where the possibilities are.
So how did you, obviously this stuff is possible, like you were saying. Is it just that you found the kind of the right group of people that was willing to put the time in, or I guess, what do you account your success to? Did you have support from I guess government, or how did you find that?
Well, I wouldn't say support from government necessarily. I mean, only support in that, we found government funds. So it was about finding people that were passionate about culture, passionate about language, because really the majority of what happens in communities is volunteer driven. So if people, really have a passion to see these things happen, then finding the resources is just a matter of perseverance, because they are out there. It's prioritization of time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've been working, because I got to know you a few years ago, and you've been working quite hard on this for how long? About 5 years, you said?
Well, I mean, I've been on my community board for 9.
Oh,
I've
wow.
been the president for the last 4. But as far as the rendezvous goes, I've been working on that for about 5 or maybe even 6 is when the first little inklings were happening.
Yeah.
But also I got passionate about good governance. Really, that's something that means a lot to me. And so for the last 4 years at our governing assemblies, I've been putting, resolution after resolution forward to have better inclusion, to have transparency. And I'm super proud of this last one that I did, which was I put forward a resolution of a declaration of self-government.
Oh.
Which passed without amendment unanimously.
Wow.
Because I was looking at the Tri-Council, the Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Ontario framework agreements for self-government, and I saw sort of the benchmarks that were laid out sort of by government for official recognition, and realized that here in BC, we already met those. We have a constitution, we have a dispute resolution body, which is our Senate. We have most of those things, but what we didn't have was an actual mandate, like an explicit mandate from the citizens. So I crafted that, and it should be coming to our AGM this year, although that's kind of controversial because of COVID. So it happening in person, there's a lot of people that are wondering if there's a way that we can do it virtually, and Métis Nation of Ontario seems to be doing that, so I don't see why we can't as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess at the AGM, that's where it's decided that that's where the vote is. And what position are you running for with the organization?
Regional Director for Vancouver Island and Powell River.
Oh, okay.
So there's 7 regional directors because we have 7 regions, and then we have 4 provincial seats, which is the president, vice president, women's chair, and youth chair.
Oh, okay. Okay. And then, so I guess, how has the response been from outside of, I guess, your local area as to what you guys are doing? Or are other locals kind of seeing what you're doing and going, hey, let's maybe we can do that in our area? Or
Well, I have had a lot of positive feedback from Métis people around BC that are looking at our Facebook group and going, wow, I kind of wish I could partake in this or that. I really do have a wonderful board that I've been just trying to assist in any way that I can on the things that they're passionate about. It's about giving the tools that I can to the people that have the drive and the passion to see it happen. Because to have a successful program, what I found is you need a champion. You need someone that's going to see it through. I like to call them shepherds almost,
yeah.
And so we have an amazing women's circle that is really well attended. And well, before COVID, we had, weekly jigging lessons, we had beading circles. Over the last 4 years, our community has just blossomed. And I'm hoping to take these things that matter to my community, and I think that they probably matter to a lot of other communities, and listening to what they want to prioritize and finding the tools to enable them to do it.
So when you're looking at this, you're coming to it, it seems like you're coming to it very much from a cultural first perspective, as opposed to, say, a political first. Is that kind of the mentality you find with you and everybody else involved in these wins?
Well, there's a saying that actually kind of echoes in my mind. It's kind of strange, but it's a saying from Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And that is, how can you come and talk to me about rights if you're not practicing your culture, if you're not practicing your language, then you've been absorbed into the dominant society. So how can you talk to me about rights? And that really echoed in my mind, where who are we as a people if we don't practice our culture, if we're not going to learn at least how to introduce ourselves in a traditional protocol fashion in our language. So that's what I'm really passionate about. But really it's both things. We need political advocacy. And I just wasn't finding that from MNBC in the last 4 years, frankly. Like, for instance, our language program, we're being discriminated against as Métis people here in British Columbia from the First Peoples Cultural Council. And it's not their fault, but it's because of the legislation that created them. We need advocacy to change just a couple of words so that we can access that language revitalization money, that $50 million that was announced a couple of years ago, so that we can continue to fund MCHIF and to have opportunities for people all across British Columbia to learn our language.
Wow, that's kind of a big deal. I mean, because I find that too with a lot of like health programs and stuff from the federal government. It's specific to First Nation and Inuit. Leaving out Métis to go with programs that are available basically to the general Canadian. So is that kind of the same thing that you're looking at there?
Well, absolutely. So MNBC now has a new CEO, and he's been doing amazing things just in the last month and a half. He's really gotten us out there. He's the one that broke the story about discrimination in hospitals, and it was actually particularly one of the hospitals in my area, where if an Indigenous person came in, they would play a game of, so what do you think their blood alcohol level is? And they would try to, yeah, exactly.
That stuff is not surprising, but yet it's still, every time I hear it, it just like, it still wows me a little, even though you should be used to hearing it by now, but it's just crazy.
But yeah, as far as the discrimination goes, the CEO has also pointed out and made a large budget ask the first time ever, which I thought was amazing. He's pointing out, well, how much money goes towards First Nations in British Columbia, and how much goes towards a third of all Indigenous people as represented in the census as Métis people, and it's ridiculous. They get tens of millions of dollars, and we get maybe $1 million.
Yeah.
Or they probably get about 60 million, I think. I forget exactly the numbers, but there is an inequity.
Yeah.
And what I think we're in a really interesting time right now is British Columbia became the first province to pass the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So in there, it talks about Indigenous people being those listed under Section 35 of the Constitution of Canada, which is First Nations, Métis, and Inuit.
Yeah,
And within that declaration, I'm not sure how much of a deep dig you've done, but it talks about the rights of, culture, education, language.
absolutely.
And so this is an amazing opportunity. It's probably the one legislation that's passed in British Columbia that has the potential to do the most for Métis rights ever in British Columbia.
Wow. So you, with the new, you said CEO within the organization. So are they kind of more championing government to start changing some of these, like you said, if they just change a few words in a policy, is that kind of what they're focusing on right now, is trying to get those smaller, low-hanging fruit things kind of fixed?
Well, I mean, because that, like you said, the low-hanging fruit is sort of the easy wins. I think that's always appealing to government. Like,
Yeah.
I've actually been part of it's called the Victoria Urban Reconciliation Dialogue, and
Okay.
I'm on the steering committee, and I have been for the last 2.5 years, and it's basically looking at, from an urban perspective, because always urban Indigenous people seem to be forgotten about. It's a lot of status on reserve, especially here in British Columbia. So this table was put together to look at, well, how can reconciliation happen? Like, where does the rubber meet the road in an urban environment, right?
I find that's a huge issue. I find such a disconnect between basically almost every government program and in urban Indigenous populations. And, and I know the Canadian government now has the urban Indigenous people's grant funding programs, but the program is so hard and there's so many people applying that it's so hard to get money out of it, unless you're already kind of getting some money. But yeah, it just seems to be a very overlooked thing in a lot of cases. And I find it ends up curtailing about, a few small organizations trying to do little bits and pieces, but there's no real organization to say, okay, like you're in Victoria. Okay, what can we do for the Indigenous people in Victoria? And I just find there's I have lots of ideas. I don't know if they're good or bad, but I think if there was more people coming together, like a lot of these ideas would come to fruition a lot faster too.
Well, and just the plain facts of it are that over 80% of Indigenous people in British Columbia are in urban environments.
Yeah.
Either it's status off reserve, non-status, Métis. We're in an urban environment, and where can we practice our culture? I mean, we're very fortunate here in Victoria that we have a really good relationship with the Victoria Native Friendship Center.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, they're at that reconciliation dialogue with us and municipalities and the provincial government and the federal government.
Yeah.
And through those dialogues, now my community has input in the VicPD strategic planning, and we're talking to municipalities. They're asking us for input on long-term development strategies. So it really is moving forward, but I really feel that MNBC could be doing more as sort of the big brother of communities to go to bat for us. Because I know that all communities have interactions with, say, the school boards.
Mm-hmm.
And how come we have to sort of start from square one again with our school boards? And, some have greater success than others. Like some put on culture camps, which are amazing, but others are frozen out altogether from having any input with the targeted Aboriginal funding for our children. And that's just not right. We need a big brother to step in and go, hey, wait a minute. No, we have a right to be in there, to be consulted.
Well, that's what is, I find really frustrating about a lot of this too, is you'll have really good success, like you say, in one area, but then it doesn't translate to another area. And it's almost like there's this invisible boundary where whatever happened there can't possibly work here. So we just can't do that. But it's but we've had success. So even if you have to change it a little, why don't we try that at least? And like you said, you need somebody to be championing that, because I find, especially things like school boards and health things, it seems there's always that federal provincial argument. Then there's the regional arguments. Like here in Alberta, we have Calgary Board of Education. So if you get some good program going with them, that doesn't mean it's going anywhere else. It's not going to Edmonton, not going to any other city, town. you almost have to go and start that fight over, like you said, right from the scratch. And it just seems really redundant and a waste of time. And that's what frustrates me a lot when I see these programs, because you'll see I know out there through a mutual friend of ours, they had a great cultural program within the school board, couple of school boards there, or districts. But out here in Alberta, like, we don't even look at what happens there and say, hey, maybe we could do that, you know? So it is frustrating because there's just that uneven inequities everywhere. And it's, as soon as you get a win here, it's like, it doesn't translate anywhere.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm co-chair of the Aboriginal Ad Hoc Committee for the Victoria School District, and talks are going fairly well there. And then my kids actually go to the Francophone school here in Victoria, and there is a province-wide Francophone school district, because there's only sort of very few of them around the province, and so they're their own school district. And I'm on that committee as well. And let me tell you, their understanding of what Métis means when I was first on there, because I guess perhaps a lot of them come from Quebec, and their understanding of Métis or Métis is very different. So it'd be really nice if once again, it's that whole political advocacy thing that that our provincial body should be doing. So how come there isn't core cultural competency, like the idea of a Métis 101 that our community is continually doing with every partner that we start relationships with? Is like, no, Métis means this. It's like there's an ethnogenesis. There's like it doesn't just mean mixed. And I know that perhaps that's a whole different subject.
Yeah. Well, that gets into a big area of the hot debate. But I understand what you're saying, because I think in a lot of cases, I think if we were to come up with some standards, even setting aside that hot topic issue, but even some basic standards, like there needs to be that core competency culturally. Absolutely. But it also has to be on a local level, because the Métis from here are slightly different than here. And so you can't just kind of brushstroke it and say all Métis are this. Even if we're just talking about, the Red River, kind of Métis, you still can't brushstroke and say, well, they're all like this. That's what Métis, that's the whole culture is just this. For me, it's, you have to have that culture. Like, what does it mean to be Métis in Victoria and in that area and that kind of thing? So it's again, another frustration when you come up with these roadblocks of, it seems like the general consensus is, let's just brush it as a broad stroke for everything, and then we're good.
Well, yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, even when we were starting up our language program a couple of years ago, it's like, okay, well, is it Southern Michif? Is it Northern Michif? Is it Cree Michif? Is it French? Like there isn't just a Michif, right? People and family groups spoke with different influences in different communities, right? You take, Josh Moran, for instance, and his family, that's completely, well, not completely different, but that's definitely got its own flavor compared to Norman Fleury and his flavor of Michif, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, it's interesting that you would say sort of, what does it mean to be Métis in Victoria? Because something that happened just before COVID hit, and it was such a wonderful thing, and it makes me slightly sad that we're having to wait so long to do another one. But we had our community sort of elders and knowledge keepers and leaders and get together in circle, because we wanted to figure out, okay, well, our community, what does our community feel are sort of the hallmarks of who we are as a community of Métis people here? What do we believe in? Where do we want to see our community grow? So we were looking at sort of doing our own envisioning of what the heart of our community is and where we want it to go in the future. And it was really beautiful.
Oh, that is amazing. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I love to see stuff like that. I'm so happy when I see communities doing that. And it's not like, I know here in Northern Alberta, there's a few communities that split off, and setting aside the divisionary concepts of that, the idea that the community needs to take care of the community, I think, is a very valid and important part of Métis culture, because it really truly is that way. I mean, when you went into a community, you became part of that community. It was about making everybody succeed and everybody healthier, happier, flourishing, right?
Mm.
And you can debate tactics, like maybe the guys in Northern Alberta shouldn't have left the MNA, all that kind of, you can debate that, but the reality is I can't begrudge them for wanting to look after their communities first. And I think that's important across across the country, is it really should be community-based governance, in my opinion. The community should be relating information up. So like you said, so you can take it to that bigger brother to go talk to somebody about the whole of BC in your case. But on a community level, you still need that support to have the decision making and to have those kinds of conversations.
Well, absolutely. In fact, something that I really want to see is getting rid of the one size fits all, because each community has different people, has different priorities, and already community volunteers and leadership are working on the things that are priorities for their community. And what I want to do is see, when they say, hey, we're having issues with our school board, so prioritizing helping them with that. Or if they want some kind of a revenue making project, having the capital corporation help them out with that, help them out with a business plan, help them out with some seed money, like prioritizing healthy communities, because how can you have a healthy nation if you don't have healthy communities? And like I said, one size fits all does not work. And also one and done programming doesn't work. We need to build, we need to invest in our nation and get returns on that, as opposed to finding money, dispersing it like, we money party. It's like, no, let's build on what we get so that we can keep growing, as opposed to just dispersing the funds that we get.
Well, and I mean, that leads to the whole, looking at the next 7 generations. You want to build something now that maybe your great grandkids are still using.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think that's an important thing that is missed when you get into a lot of political conversations specifically, because it tends to boil down to basically, where can we get government funding for this, all these things. But it's not really having that focus to say, we trust the communities enough to give them this much money to start building these programs on their own. It's almost like, well, because of the way the government has things and reporting on money, it's like you got to have every dollar accounted for, and maybe some communities are ready, maybe they're not. But I do think that for sure you need to get rid of that one and done, the one size fits all. But I do think you can take your success, translate it somewhere else, and say, well, this worked for them, but let's change it a little, and then, hey, it worked.
Well, what I'd love to do is, it seems like, volunteers, they do so much work. And what I'd love to see is different communities sort of writing up the different programs that they've done successfully, and writing, how much money it took, how many volunteer hours, approximately, of course, and what kind of supplies and what was needed, and putting that in a binder of ideas. And then that binder of ideas could go to each community, and they can flip through and go, hey, you know what? We managed to get some funding for health, or we managed to get some funding for this. Let's look and see what other communities have done. Oh, this looks great. If we just sort of change this or change that, that'll fit our community perfectly. That kind of mentorship, that kind of peer learning, I think is so valuable, especially with volunteers that only have a certain number of hours, right?
Absolutely. And it is hard, because I think volunteers, a lot of times it ends up where the volunteers just end up burning out, because there's so few people doing trying to do so much work, because there is so much to do. I mean, just here in this conversation, we probably identified 15 things that, you could see improvements in, right? But yeah, no, I think, yeah, we need to move beyond just mandating that, well, if volunteers want to do it, great. But if not, I guess it doesn't get done. Like you said earlier, you need that champion, that the person that just heard that along, to keep the volunteers engaged and keep them from being overwhelmed and burned out.
And really listening, like having effective communication, like knowing what's going on in all the communities and what their struggles are and what their passions are. And then if MNBC has that, then they can be on the lookout and go, oh, hey, that community is doing this. Look, they need to look at this grant, because that would tie in exactly, and that would boost them and give them the resources they need to be really successful in this thing that they're so good at and so passionate about,
Yeah, absolutely. And even creating a network where let's people can connect with people from other communities to see how they've been like that way. The I guess the higher levels of governance in the MNBC in this case don't necessarily have to get into the nitty gritty details, but they can just literally be connecting communities with communities and people with people, saying, "You want to know about that program? You need to talk to these people."
Well,
That would be amazing.
absolutely. And honestly, there hasn't really been opportunities created for that kind of peer relationship and that mentorship. And what I would really like to see, and we used to have it. We used to get together and have discussions at Métis Nation governing assemblies and AGMs. But those times were shortened. And for instance, the last one was just all business. We didn't have any time to get together and to sort of share or discuss, say, education. Like I was saying about how pretty much every community has a school board that they have a relationship with, and being able to talk to other communities about their relationships would be amazing to help grow theirs.
Absolutely. And then that way too, I mean, you start getting into, well, now you start communicating on a community level, then it starts helping to open up, well, maybe this school board is willing to talk to that school board, if you can get contacts there. So maybe then it even doesn't even need to be the community as much as connecting those school boards together to see how they can do it, through their language, through their understanding of budgets and whatever they need to do, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're fortunate here in Victoria to have a great Aboriginal district principal. And well, actually we have two of them. We're actually quite lucky here.
Yeah.
But yeah, and for them to be able to talk to other people in the same position in other districts, or to inform other districts about the successes that we've had here, so it can be, not just from the community idea, but from what's going on inside the districts as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've always been kind of impressed with how you guys keep kind of slowly moving forward on these things. I stay up to date with you on Facebook a little bit and see what you guys are doing, and it has been, I've been really happy to see how you've just kind of steadily progressed. And I'm sure you've had setbacks and speed bumps along the way. It's not been an easy road, but I'm very impressive to see how far you guys have come, in the time that I've known you. So I guess moving forward with that, when you're running, is that you want to kind of continue that and take that to, like you said, another level where you start maybe reaching out to more communities to see that kind of success as well? As that kind of the mentality of running, I guess?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I think, we're not the only communities that have had successes, right? Like there's successes in each and every one of the communities in this region and across the province. And I would like to have their successes inform, my community in Victoria and the other communities. So like I said, we need opportunities to dialogue and to exchange information on successes, but also I really haven't felt like the resources of the provincial body have sort of lifted up those communities. Like you mentioned the urban programming for Indigenous peoples, UPIP.
Yeah.
And yeah, we are fortunate that MNBC 4 years ago did negotiate some funds for each community every year. So that has been really helpful to have some seed money. And boy, let me tell you that at least in my community, and probably a lot of communities, as long as a couple bucks are for some, string and some baling twine, we can make almost anything. We can make a program run on a shoestring and multiply that like 100-fold. So that has been very helpful. But there's also other programs that, I see, and really I only know about it because I love taking in information and I research, and I've seen like the housing money that the MNC negotiated, I think 3 years ago or so. So a portion of that has come to British Columbia. And in the last 3 years, we've amassed like $17 million that is sitting in a bank account. And I think 1.5 million has gone out for helping do some renovations for elders that don't have, reverse mortgages and those kind of things. So, that is helpful for, I think, about 75 elders. But there's still $15 million sitting in that bank account.
Wow.
And I've been talking to, he's actually a Métis person here in Victoria. but he's part of, you know, the co-op housing, social housing kind of crew, and talking to him about how when we build social housing, you can leverage so many government programs, and if you did it right, you know, you can leverage those programs, and then you can have that Métis specific cultural social housing, and keep that in the nation, and slowly pay it off, and then you could use those resources, like they'd be in the nation forever. And so you could use those resources once they're paid off to start doing subsidies for prescription medication for elders. You know, like there's ways that we can be building these resources, as opposed to just sort of spending the money and then waiting with our hand out for more money to spend, as opposed to building our resources.
Absolutely. And that was always something that, you know, Jason and I have talked about, probably on this podcast, but also privately on our own, is the whole concept of nation building, not necessarily from you know, the nationalistic perspective, but just from a strengthening of culture, people, connections. Because I find here in Alberta, a lot of communities are very disconnected from each other. So what happens in a different region doesn't even get mentioned to people in another region, just because, you know. So it's just, there's a lot of disconnection, and I kind of totally forgot where I was going with this, but yeah, no, I think there's definitely an opportunity there, and I think the nice thing about what I hearing you're going to be doing when running for this position is trying to take those strengths from every community, and where communities may be weaker, they may be stronger on other things. So let's try to balance that out for everyone. But yeah, no, I think it's amazing, just the nation building concept of making things stronger for the future, rather than, like you said, just one off. Okay, we got some money. Okay, now we're out of money. Let's wait for more money, because it doesn't build anything.
No, we need to invest in ourselves, and then have returns eventually, and then those returns we reinvest. And then, like you said, the 7-generation thing, like, are we still going to in 7 generations be like twiddling our thumbs waiting for the government to give us some cash so that we can have a rendezvous, or are we going to do it ourselves? You know, we're supposed to be Mississauga, those that govern ourselves. So let's invest in ourselves.
Well, absolutely, and make yourselves a lot more independent. Like, make us independent from government, you know, programs. You know, I mean, those are great, but the long term is those just fluctuate depending on who's in power, and sometimes there's more funding, sometimes there's less funding. So now we have language classes, now we cut them out for 4 years, for 4 to 10 years, then we have them again. And so I've always felt we need to build things to where, yes, that government money will help, but we can also carry on these programs within our own nation, funded by our own nation, because we've invested in businesses, we've invested in Métis people, and things like that. So,
well, I'll use I actually think it's sort of a multi-pronged approach, right? Like, there's a whole bunch of fronts. I think, you know, there's you know, local and provincial. I'll use an analogy from Alberta, I guess. Alberta has been known to be sort of a boom and bust, boom and bust, boom and bust, right? And
absolutely.
You know, after the boom, during the bust, it's like, oh, maybe we should have invested some of that money into, you know, a heritage fund or something, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. We need to advocate for equality in funding from government, and we need to advocate for you know, our rights. But you're right. In a lot of ways, depending on which way the wind blows with the government of the day, you know, it can be a pretty steep climb and descent. So we need to take those things and invest in our nation during the good times, and then weather the storm, like the Harper years. Those were not good times for Indigenous people, right?
No, and I think that's the thing, is that the one thing that drives me also, I think drives a lot of people crazy within that nonprofit world of government programs and government grants, and is that the money is so specifically allocated. You know, I've even seen grants where you're allowed to buy this, but not this, but you need that in order to make that function. You know what I mean? So it's the kind of the hypocrisy. Yeah, exactly. So it's the hypocrisy of, we're going to give you, say, you know, $10,000 for a language program, but it also has to be based on these criteria and what we've laid out and what we say, and you have to account for all that. So there's no real sovereignty there.
Mm.
Whereas what I would prefer is for the government to say, we're going to give you 10,000 for a language program. Now we want to report in a year saying you were successful. That's what we want. Well, we want it successful for your community, as opposed to successful for what somebody in Ottawa decided based on some conversations they had with other people there. You know what I mean? Or that kind of, or a provincial grant that maybe was decided not by any Métis people, but it's for Métis people. You know what I mean? Because I find a lot of the Indigenous grants are like that, where the reporting is so strict. You almost, in a lot of them, although it's changing now, but in a lot of the grants, you can't even pay honorariums. You know, you have to give gift cards or gas cards. And it's like, but that's not how Indigenous people work. So you're kind of failing right from the get-go, you know?
Well, it is starting to change, you know, because I've been doing grants for, well, you know, not forever, but for long enough now that I have seen some of that loosening somewhat. But yeah, I mean, there is nothing that compares to us having our own money to do our programs, you know, and having our own people look at what best practices are and learning from each other, learning from other provinces. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if I want to dip into those waters of the, you know, Métis National Council dysfunction, but boy, you know, we're not doing ourselves any favors right now. It's
No.
not a good scene, you know.
No, and I don't know if it's just 2020 and everything is just, let's just throw it all in the air and see what lands on its feet. But it just seems like everything kind of ramped up over the last, you know, 12 to 18 months of just division and more divisiveness between people. So I don't know. And we aren't doing ourselves any favors right now. I know that.
Well, I mean, I've been watching, like I absorb Métis information, and especially politics and stuff, through osmosis. I just can't get enough of it. But you know, I've been seeing it sort of coming towards a wall for more than that. You know, I think this is sort of inevitable. I think the structure of the Métis National Council is antiquated. You know, those bylaws. You know, I'm a governance guy, right? Like, and looking at those bylaws, I just shake my head. Like, we need to come to the table again and re-envision what a Métis nation looks like, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
With equality and equity, because this whole, like, you know, big brother little brother situation where you know, I was born in Winnipeg, right? And but in living out here, I feel like a second-class Métis citizen, because we only get half the funding, even though from what I understand, we have twice the number of registered citizens as Saskatchewan does. Because, you know, they had an issue with their registry for quite some time, right? So
yeah,
they had to
absolutely
start over again, right? But
yeah, no, it is weird, and I think it, in a lot of their, just even the structure is set up, it's very discriminatory. I mean, what is it, like BC and Ontario never got as many votes in the MNC level as, you know, the three other provinces, and why is that? Like, that seems ridiculous. That doesn't seem like a democratic system to me.
Well, yeah, we get a third of the votes. You know, we get 5 votes, and the Prairie provinces get 15. And if you look at those old bylaws, it actually had measures in place that as Ontario and BC got their citizenship numbers up, they would gain more votes. But that never came to pass.
Yeah.
So,
well, and even in the structure, a lot of the things that I've seen as far as how you can even run for some of these positions is so restrictive. I understand the idea, like as an example, there's you know, you can only run for president if you've had this much time on, you know, a regional council and stuff, and I understand that, but what that does is it eliminates people from being able to get to that president's position if that's what they want to run for. Because some people just don't have the resources to volunteer tons of time and be part of boards and things like that. I mean, some people just are working to live, like, you know, barely scraping by kind of thing. So even if they wanted to help out, there's still those restrictions based on those old policies, right?
Yeah, no, I absolutely. In fact, you know, I've been facing some strange discrimination myself, where some people are saying, well, you know, you're not independently wealthy and retired, so how do you have enough time to do this position justice? And I just think, well, I don't know. I created a language program. I'm doing rendezvous. I'm consulting with government about UNDRIP. I mean, I'm doing the work, guys. You know, it just seems like there's this perception that you know, you have to be old and retired in order to be a Métis politician.
Well, exactly, right? Or like you said, independently wealthy or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's and that's the thing. I mean, you know, obviously you have the time because you're able to do this. And so I think it's important too that we recognize that the older generations, like you know, Clem and those people, they've been in those positions for decades. And so I think right now, even though there's a lot of kind of upheaval, I think my personal theory is perhaps some of it stems from the fact that we're going to have to see a change of the guard soon, where a lot of these, you know, leaders that are in these positions now almost have to leave because it's been too long. And so with that, you're going to bring in new people, younger people, new ideas, fresh thoughts. And I think that just makes everything kind of churn up, and it churns up, baby, brings the skeletons out of the closets. And, you know.
Well, in fact, you know, my town is like a university college town, right? It's also a government town. But, you know, in speaking to young Métis people, there's a lot of them that, you know, I'm like, hey, you know, MNBC, they're like, eh. And I'm like, well, what do you mean, eh? They're like, well, you know, we don't feel like it really represents our worldview, like our values. For instance, the Métis Nation of British Columbia just petitioned for intervenor status on a Supreme Court case about hunting rights here in British Columbia. There's a fellow from a nation, they're in Washington State, but their traditional territory extended into the Kootenays, you know, before there was the medicine line that divided the United States and Canada. And so that it's about hunting rights. And in the submission for intervenor status, you know, that our current president made an affidavit talking about how Métis people are the only ones that want intervenor status, that the Kootenays make up our traditional territory. And believe me, there's so many young, informed, educated people that are shocked that we would just outright say that the Kootenays is our traditional territory. And I know that there's presidents in the Kootenays that are also shocked because they have really good relations with the First Nations out there, and you know, they weren't told that we were going to assert that the Kootenays were our traditional territory.
Yeah.
And you know, we have to be very careful. You know, we've been here a long time. But we haven't asserted any, you know, we haven't done a Pally case here. And you know, with UNDRIP on the horizon, like I don't see how this forwards our ends of having our rights accommodated and recognized when we're basically going up against First Nations in a confrontational manner. And that's why I think that young people just don't see MNBC presenting Métis people well on their behalf.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, we see that here in Alberta. I think it was, man, it's got to be 10, 15 years ago. Métis were given full hunting rights throughout the province, and then, but it was kind of never consulted with any First Nation in the province. So the Blackfoot Confederacy took it to court. It got shut down, and now it's a different program altogether now. But essentially, everybody in southern Alberta has no hunting rights because the government's afraid to open that talk up. And I've always said, why aren't these Métis leaders and organizations going to First Nations first to work these issues out, and then simply going to the government and saying, we've already worked it out, here's what we're doing, so it's a rubber stamp from you and we're good. Like, and to me, it's kind of like a lot of these programs and stuff, when you say, you know, building, you got to build on things, it's about kind of trying to find those loopholes where you're not going outside the rules, but you're pushing the rules to get what you need within a system that maybe is restrictive. You know what I mean? Like finding sources of funding, maybe from a non-traditional grant process program. But I think that's important to do, and go outside those boundaries and say, well, let's start going to First Nations first and dealing with that, our family first, and then going to the government, because it's an easy win for them then. I mean, there's no fighting. Everybody's in agreement. and then the government gets to say, look what we did. But that's my theory on it anyway.
Well, that's the thing, and unfortunately, because we've had high level political representation sort of set up a confrontational relationship with First Nations, there's a lot of relationship building to be done, and I think that is probably one of the relations that we need to focus on the most is sitting down and speaking with First Nations.
Yeah,
I mean, with the pipeline, I still remember seeing the spokesperson for the Métis National Council, David Chartrand, saying, well, how come this one First Nation in Burnaby wants to shut down this pipeline? That's not helping any of us. Like Métis people want this pipeline. And I'm sitting here in Victoria going, my community doesn't actually, on the whole, but that's great that that our spokesperson from Winnipeg is sort of speaking on our behalf here on the coast in Victoria.
Yeah. But and again, that's divisive language. It's divisive attitudes. We've documented many of those on the show here as well, and it is too bad, because I think it's this adversarial attitude, and I think, like you said earlier, the youth coming into these organizations are going, well, yeah, I don't want that. I don't want to fight with First Nations. Like, I respect their land, it's their territory, and I don't want to fight with them. I want to work with them. And I think that's where a lot of these changes will happen as we see new leadership, new, I guess, kind of regime changes, But again, I hope it's sustainable, so that, as leadership changes down the future, we don't go back to the old ways. You know what I mean?
Well, that's where I think we need substantial governance reform at all levels. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of a policy wonk, so I look at the legislation of MNBC, and I can see that we need to up our game, because we're in that sort of growing pain between a nonprofit society and a government. And when you look at all the mechanisms for inclusion, transparency, accountability that are built in, say, the Westminster parliamentary system and other systems, because they've been through this where bad things have happened, and they've gone, how can we stop that from happening again? So over the last, hundreds of years, they put these mechanisms in place of citizen oversight bodies, of ombudspersons, of all these kind of mechanisms. Now, I'm not saying that we should just imitate the Westminster system, because, we're an Indigenous nation. But we can definitely learn from that as we're going through our growing pains, because they've already experienced, some of the growing pains and we can learn how they've solved that,
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's like what we've been talking about with all of these programs, like with your successes and that community's successes in this community. Like, we should be sharing that information just like we're sharing this. We should be taking what governance systems are out there and saying, okay, well, what works and what really doesn't. So let's take what works, and we'll take what works from all of these places, and then go, okay, well, how do we put them all together to make it work for us with our values and our traditions? And I think it'll end up being some really twisted up hybrid system, but I think it would be very effective, rather than trying to, I guess, like, recreate the wheel and start from scratch again,
Well, and what I'd like is sort of a default open kind of governance, a default inclusion kind of governance. We have a governing assembly that's made up of presidents and the board of directors, and I think it's really underutilized. And I put forward a resolution for board expenses to be posted on the MNBC website, because I think that's transparency. There's no reason to hide that. Right?
Absolutely.
And also, in transparency, then there's more of a confidence that your government's doing well. Well, if there's this tendency to sort of not share documents, not to share information, anytime that someone has even the appearance of being secretive, it's like, oh, what are they up to, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And we've talked about that a lot, where, let's say you do that, you post the expenses, and then you get caught, I shouldn't have maybe put that receipt in, and there may be some stuff like that. But on the flip side, at least then you can say, I made a mistake, I'll fix it, and we can move on.
Totally.
But what you have now is people going, like you said, sitting there wondering. And as soon as people wonder about something, their imagination kicks in. So
Absolutely.
now, even if everything's totally legit and on the level, you have people thinking you're blowing money on cocaine, you're flying first class in private jets, you're doing whatever. But that's because people just don't know. And then that's the dangers of not being as transparent as possible, unfortunately.
Well, absolutely. Like, I because I have no access to, a lot of the information about how, I know that the audited statements are out and stuff, but I still don't understand how the Métis National Council can get 10% of all the money, and where does that go?
Yeah.
I don't understand. For MNBC, I've been pushing for financial transparency, and there was a provincial budget committee that I was a part of, and it sort of was really slow going because I didn't feel like we had all of the information. We were despite signing a non-disclosure agreement, we weren't given like the meat and potatoes, and the whole idea was to make the budget understandable to the average citizen, so that the average citizen could see it and go, oh, okay, as opposed to, how come there isn't money for that? How come there isn't money for this? Just if you make it transparent, then people go, oh, well, okay, I understand now, the struggles, and, this is allocated to that, and this is allocated to that. And we can't just take this and move it here because that's not how the funding works. Right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And then that goes back to that restrictive government requirements. So if they give you money for travel, you can only spend that money on travel. Even if you only need half that money and you found a cheaper way to do things, it doesn't matter. You got to spend that money on travel. And so that's where I think people are kind of misinformed as to how government money really works. It's not just, here's a check, do what you want. But in a lot of ways, that's where I think the sovereignty needs to be brought into these discussions of saying, yes, we need money for travel and for this program and for this and administration, and we need office supplies, we need computers, yes, all that stuff. But we need to spend that as we see fit, not how the government sees fit. So if you get $100,000 for computers, well, if we only spent 30, because that's what we needed, let's take the other 70, move it over to language programs. But there's not that freedom, right? Because if you did that, you'd be in a lot of trouble. So, and I think that's where maybe a discussion needs to be had with governments and stuff about sovereignty on these funding issues. Like, I'll be happy to report to you what we did with the money. And if you think it's completely invalid, then okay. But if you think, us funding a language program rather than buying brand new laptops every year for everyone is like that seems more reasonable to me. And I think that's what we need to have discussions with government and get that conversation flowing a lot more, is that sovereignty,
Well, also, yes, certain things are earmarked for certain things, but there's also always choices. And that's what I've been sort of really trying to put out there is like, why don't we be transparent with where money goes? Like, yes, this might only be for laptops or whatever. Well, or for tech, let's say, well, do we need 30 laptops here, or is there a possibility that every year a certain number of communities can get new laptops because they need it, because volunteers have a lot of time, but if they don't have the tools, then that time is not as effective, right?
Absolutely. Or even taking some of that money and say, well, maybe we don't need that many computers, but we can use the rest to fund a program for kids that are maybe don't have the money to buy a computer. Maybe we can help subsidize that or something for school or something.
Or like the amount of swag that at AGMs and whatever else is being handed out. I mean, I've talked to my community about this several times. Like, why not have a backpack program, and instead of giving it to delegates, that backpack can have a water bottle and can have a notebook and a bunch of pencils, and boom,
For sure.
You got a backpack for school supplies for kids, right? Like, there's all choices, right?
But yeah, I think that's an important thing. I think even if it's allocated, I think it needs to be transparent. So even if the government says, well, you got to spend that on travel, well, what travel did you do? Because honestly, and from a total outsider's point of view, when you see the audited numbers and it says $1 million in a year for travel, that to me seems high. That seems like they're eating steak dinners, they're drinking champagne and flying on private jets. You know what I mean? Like, how much travel do you do for $1 million? So, but if they were to say, okay, but we sent 3 people to this meeting and it cost this much, and we sent 5 people over to this meeting in this province, and we did this and we did, then maybe people could at least go, well, it still seems high, but it's pretty reasonable. I mean,
well, that's the thing about how to make it understandable, right?
yeah,
And that's my whole thing with this budget committee and the whole financial transparency is, and once again, this is how different levels of government do their expenses. Is they actually write down, okay, attended this conference on this day,
mm-hmm.
and if that was all laid out as opposed to just like $1 million travel, well, that doesn't tell me anything. You could
Yeah.
be going to Paris for a soiree or
Exactly.
who knows, right?
Absolutely.
So there's nothing wrong with transparency. I think it just allows people to know what work's being done and that it's being done, effectively on our behalf. Because all this is truly on our behalf, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And it builds trust. I think once people saw where the numbers were, there might be a few things you can improve. There always is improvements you can make. But I think for the most part, people would be able to see it and go, yeah, okay, that's, I might not agree, but it's pretty reasonable. I mean, you need office supplies. Okay, maybe I think you could have spent less, but you spent it on office supplies. It didn't go into some, secret bank account and just called office supplies. You know what I mean? Like, because I think that's a lot of people just kind of imagine is that, oh, well, they're just funneling this money into different, making themselves rich. And who knows? Maybe they are. We don't know right now, right?
Well, that's why transparency is so important, right? Because it's the same thing as what they say about justice. Having actual justice, it's as important to have the perception of justice. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So
absolutely, yeah.
So with transparency, even the perception that things are being accounted for, or the perception that our finances are being well looked after, instills confidence in citizens.
Yes.
And also, I wrote a resolution which passed about more roles and responsibilities for regional governance councils, because there really wasn't a heck of a lot. I think regional governance councils have a very important purpose, and that is to be that flow of communication from communities. What's going on? What do you guys need? What challenges are you facing? Bringing that up to the board level and to the different ministries, so that everyone's informed as to some of the good things that are happening, but also, like I said, all the funding is about choices, and perhaps there's some choices that can be made, like, oh, wait a minute, they need this. Hey, well, we just got a grant for this program where we can definitely give them some resources for this, and also if the because we don't get that much information from the board about what's going on at MNBC to communities, so that sometimes the person in our office, this actually just happened recently a couple times, that we were helping out a new citizen with a bursary or a training thing or whatever, and the person in our office gave them information, and they went away and then came back and said, oh no, that's not happening anymore. This is the new person in that position, and now there's this new program. And so we have new people to our community that are telling us what's going on, and it's super embarrassing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're at about an hour here, and I don't want to keep you too much longer, but is there kind of anything you want to let people know about, I guess, any other things that we haven't talked about here that you're looking forward to doing if you were elected, so to speak?
Well, definitely a better relationship, like I said, with First Nations, because we really need to, sort of, I think, almost start fresh in a lot of ways, and also with our provincial government. I mean, there's been a lot of focus on the federal government with, because it was just after the last election, just before the last MNBC election, that the Daniels decision came down, which changed the face of funding for the Métis Nation. I mean, that's why we have this housing agreement. That's why we have all this stuff. And while there's been a big focus on that, we really haven't focused very much on our provincial relationship in the last 4 years. And I think that's how the Métis Nation of Ontario has done so well, because they have a good relationship there. And I mean, I've been focusing on it because I've been at these reconciliation tables for the last 2.5 years. And I think we need to take care of what's in our own backyard here in British Columbia. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
and it's just about I am running with there's a bunch of candidates that all feel that we need this kind of governance reform. We need this grassroots movement. So I'm part of a team that are community presidents from around the province, and we also have incumbent Vice President Lisa Smith, who's going back in, and a regional director from Region 7, Walter Minold, that's running for president. And we all want that grassroots movement to go into the board level, because we feel that there's nothing stronger than listening to our communities, empowering our communities, because that's what builds a nation.
That's amazing. I really love that attitude, and I hope you have some great success in the election. When is the actual election?
So it's by strictly mail-in ballot, and so it is September 21st is the big day. But all the ballots need to be into the Chief Electoral Officer's office by that date, not postmarked. So yeah, September 21st is the big day.
All right. Well, we hopefully we can have you on as the newly elected after September 21st.
I would love that, Darcy.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I guess to everybody watching, that's it. The jig is up.